Welcome to Aalto Sustainability Talks, our brand new seminar series, which is aiming to present topical sustainability research from Aalto, with the idea of making our research more accessible, as well as spark discussion on sustainability challenges and their solutions. The Sustainability Talks is organized around different sustainable development goals of the UN. I'm Minna Halme, Professor of Sustainability Management at Aalto University Business School and Academic Director of Aalto Sustainability Hub. The Hub organizes Aalto Sustainability Talks, and it was originally the Hub established 3 years ago by about 50 Aalto people. Our original aims for the Hub were to make Aalto one of the leading universities in the world that is focusing on research and teaching that addresses sustainability challenges in an interdisciplinary and solution-oriented way, in a co-creative fashion between researchers from different fields and with our stakeholders from the society. We also set the goal of integrating sustainability into all teaching of Aalto, so as to equip our graduates with capabilities that are needed to address big sustainability challenges like climate change, loss of biodiversity, as well as increasing inequality. Today, sustainability is the key central issue in the new incoming strategy of the whole Aalto. The launch of this series denotes that goal well. The monthly sustainability talk sessions will run online throughout the fall. We begin with the theme of water, one of the fundaments of life on Earth. There are a few principles that we have here for the purposes of co-creation. We want to set a friendly tone for the discussions here, so I hope that everybody will join us in this quest. In order to participate and ask a question, you can either put your question in chat in the webinar so that the staff will then bring your question to the presenter, or you can ask it yourself and we will then unmute you. When you can ask a question, you can type your question at any time, and after each presentation we will then take the most prominent questions, and there is also a question and answer session after all the presentations. Our Vice President Ossi Naukkarinen has promised to chair this session, which is a very nice honor for the first event of Aalto Sustainability Talks series. Ossi, welcome.
Thank you, Minna. I hope you can hear my voice. First of all, it's my great pleasure and honor to be here. It's a very topical, timely issue that we are dealing with in this whole series, and today we are focusing on water, something that here in this room, in this country, in this city, we take for granted that we can have a glass of water without even thinking about it. Glass of fresh, pure, clean water that we can drink, we can do many kinds of things with it. But if you think about it at least for a second, it's quite clear that we need to have a very developed political system, technological system, economic system to make sure that the water in pipes is running and is clean so that we can use it. It's not like that at all in many countries around the planet. And Today we have three interesting approaches or dives maybe into the water. And the first one will be by Professor Marko Keskinen, who I have to check so that I don't say anything stupid, as I often do. Professor of Water Resources Management and Policy at Aalto University School of Engineering. And Marko also has a very long background, not only in academia, but in businesses and in governance bodies, not only in Finland, but in Asia as well. But please, Marko, share your wise words with us. Please.
Thank you, Ossi. Not sure about the wise words, but some words nevertheless. So good afternoon also on my behalf. Really happy to be here to open the Aalto Sustainability Talks with the very important topic of water. The topic of my presentation is water and SDGs, and a sub-question related to that is what grows when we water sustainability. There is a lot of research that we do in our Water and Development Research Group regarding this topic, and if you're interested, I advise you to look at our website, and also my colleague Maija will present some of it later today. First, very quickly about the sustainability itself. What's the fuss? Is it just another buzzword of the day? Well, obviously not. We have just one planet here, and there is no really planet B, or there is no plan B either for us humans here to live in this one planet we have. The challenge, of course, is that we are already exceeding those so-called planetary boundaries, the physical boundaries that enable us to live and prosper in this planet. They include water, but they include, importantly, many other natural resources that we need to address. So why then to talk about water? Well, as you may have reckoned from the picture, it is quite obvious. It is a blue planet we are living in. Over 70% of our Earth's surface is covered by water, and basically everything, every piece of life in this planet is enabled by hydrological cycle, nature's own recycling system powered by sun. Here also, however, there is a quite major challenge. First one is that only 1% of the water available, of the water in Earth is easily available for human use. And then another challenge, at the same time, the water use is growing. The last image is from the waterscarcityatlas.org, which is a website put together by Aalto's researchers and tries to include data, nice visualizations, and also research summaries on this increasing water scarcity on Earth and what it actually means and implies. So really the question then is, okay, we have water as a fundament of sustainability in this one planet we have, and at the same time its availability is decreasing. Why it matters? It matters because water holds several roles for both sustainability and for development. So being able to sustain our ability to live in this planet, water plays a major role. First one, where Ossi already referred in his opening remarks, links to the clean water. It has a very fundamental role for health and well-being. It also links very closely to equality issues, whether it's about gender, but also broader equality issues in our society. There are still hundreds of millions of people without proper access to safe water or sanitation. And very often those are the people and groups that are already otherwise also most marginalized and vulnerable in our societies. At the same time, it really is not only about the drinking water we talk here. I can promise there will always be enough in terms of quantity enough drinking water in this planet. What really matters is that how much we have water available for food production and food security. One of the research questions we have in our research group is therefore how to eat less water. So water has a fundamental role for food production, but also increasingly to energy production. And this is because renewable energy, whether it's a bio energy or hydropower, which is particularly important for electricity production, is fundamentally dependent on water. At the same time, of course, water plays a crucial role for industries, for circular economy, and still causes major economic losses, for example, through floods, droughts, and extreme weather events. And finally, of course, talking about the planet, we talk about the ecosystems and nature and the crucial role that water cycle has in maintaining those. Water and water cycle is also the driving force that brings the implications and impacts, be them negative or positive, from the changing climate to the environment and to the human societies. So 3 fundamentally critical roles water plays. If we start to think what it really means, it also means that water plays a particularly important role for social aspects for our living in this planet. It does have a critically important role for economic, and it does obviously link to the environment and nature we all kind of live and are surrounded with. I guess it goes without the saying that somewhere in there between there is the sustainability. So these are the 3 fundamentally important pillars of sustainability, and water covers kind of all of them. So what we then talk when we talk about watering sustainability, what it really means when we add water to sustainability. There are 2 fundamentally important things here. First of all, it's important to understand the role that water plays as a driver for development, both enabling and hindering the ways we are able to develop our societies. But importantly, and this is at least as important, I would argue, is that water creates a connecting factor between different sectors and emphasizes the importance for maintaining systemic view when we talk about sustainability. One practical example of this kind of systemic view is provided by so-called nexus approaches that also Finland, for example, is strongly promoting in the high-level political forums related to SDG implementation. It means that we, instead of just having a set of sectoral SDGs, we actually also consider their linkages, so the nexus of it. One of the most well-known nexuses is the water, energy, food nexus that links the energy production, food production, and water use and availability in this planet. There is quite much research being done on the water, energy, food nexus approach over the past decade, including our research group. I think there is 2 fundamentally important elements there in the nexus. One is that we need to understand the linkages, how different sectors link together, but at least as important again is that we need to enhance the policy coherence. We need to understand that the way we govern these sectors is quite different, and that there are kind of governance gaps and silos that we need to address if we want to maintain kind of a systemic view. So to conclude, the question was what kind of grows out of sustainability when we water it. So if we consider the Sustainable Development Goals and add some water, what will we get? I would argue that we get a kind of a logical way of seeing where those Sustainable Development Goals fit in this one planet of ours. It provides a kind of a proper context for our work where everything builds on the natural resources that we have in this planet, then enables the societal interactions and societal work we have, and then includes also the economic component and element there. It also reminds us about the importance of governance and the way we govern the SDGs as well as the natural resources. So this was a short introduction to why watering sustainability matters. I thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Marko. We will have more time for discussion and questions at the end of the session after three talks. But now, if there are questions or comments from the audience from somewhere out there, please come up with your ideas. Are we having any? But we do have a smaller audience here on site, and we have some questions from audience here, please.
Okay, thank you. Unless there are any other questions, I would like to question this idea of having the global perspective and the local perspective. And you mentioned that there will be enough drinking water, but not enough water for food. And then when we see this from the Finnish perspective, how do you see it possible to kind of convey the message of these water challenges in the Finnish context, where the questions of water scarcity are quite distant, you would say? And then you showed the picture of the planetary boundaries where it looks actually quite great for water.
Yeah.
How can you raise that sense of urgency while you at the same time show pictures and we know the Finnish context that this is maybe not so easy to convey?
Yeah, very good question. And actually, if I would have had more time, there would have been a bit more explanation that while this is a global framework, we actually do need local actions wherever that happens. In Finland, I would be daring to argue that it's not really about water scarcity so much. But for example, Espoo, the city of Espoo, where we are also at Aalto located. So city of Espoo is doing a really good work on water-related SDGs, for example, where the issue is then more related to, for example, water quality issues. And that's obviously very important. And I wasn't able to really address that aspect at this stage. Additional element there, of course, is that Finland has a quite strong role in the global arena, especially in the UN system, and we are quite well known on our water expertise, and we can make use of that expertise also globally, and that's something I would kind of argue that we can do even more stronger than we currently do.
Thanks, Marko. I think we have time for one more question from the audience, please.
Yes, I will convey a question that was raised in the chat. So it says, thank you so much for this presentation, Marko. This economy, society, planet model looks a lot like Kate Raworth's donut economics model. Do you think going forward, this kind of a model can help organizing solutions to solve water problems, for instance, in cities?
Yeah, I do agree. And the donut economic model was actually something we just discussed before this seminar started. I feel that it's really nice way of capturing the planetary boundaries together with the kind of social foundation it lays and understanding the ways forward from here. So I would argue that definitely the same type of model was there. That was the Stockholm Resilience Center's depiction of SDGs.
Good. Thanks again, Marko.
Thank you.
And big applause from all over. Thank you. And our next speaker comes also from Aalto University, Maija, Taka, who is a postdoc researcher and project manager for the Water and Development Research Group. And there's very interesting doctoral educational model developed by Maija and others in that group. And well, why should I talk more? Maija, please.
Thank you. Where's the pointer?
I think Marko took it.
Kiitos. Okay, so good afternoon and thank you for inviting me here. As already introduced, my name is Maija Taka. I work as a postdoc in a Water and Environmental Engineering Research Group. And I'm here today to shortly present our recent work related to SDGs and water. So as we all know, SDGs are quite a matrix to tackle and to implement, and we challenge SDG by examining, is it just to add water? Can that be the solution to actually achieving the sustainability? The work I'm presenting here is a joint collaboration with 6 great doctoral students I'm working with, and the manuscript is currently in review in One Earth journal. So sooner or later, I hope you will be able to read more online. We had 2 main questions to our work. What is the importance of water security in achieving SDGs? And we wanted to make it in a more structured way. We wanted to make quantitative analysis to actually define the value and importance of water security on SDGs. Additionally, we wanted to find out if water can actually limit the success of SDGs. For us in the water engineering research group, it's obvious that water is a key resource. You can imagine the planet, what it would look like without any water. And we wanted to use this example in the context of SDGs. Instead of using SDG 6 as the water definition, we used the concept of water security. And according to United Nations, it covers both the water quantity and the water quality. It's a resource for livelihoods, human well-being and development. It ensures the resilience and protection for pollution and disaster-related events and risks. And it's for preserving ecosystems in a climate of peace and political stability. So quite a wide concept to use, but this is a wide concept for understanding the different roles of water. So we wanted to find out the importance of water on SDGs, and we did this by collecting data from a literature review. So we wanted to actually grade the effect of water security has on each of the SDGs, and we used Nielsen classification for this one. And I will quickly introduce those gradings for you in case you're not familiar. So there's 6 levels of interaction. In the case of -3, it's the most negative effect water security can have on SDG, which means that if we improve water security, it actually cancels, it makes impossible to reach an SDG in focus. -2 is counteractive. So if we improve the water security, we actually clash the success of another goal. -1 limits the achievement of another goal, whereas we also have 3 positive linkages. +1 creates conditions that actually makes achievement of another SDG possible. +2 reinforces, so it further supports the achievement of another SDG, and +3 is indivisible. So if we improve water security, it directly leads to achievement of another SDG. So we went through a literature search. We found about 2,500 papers. There was a group of 7 of us going through those. It was a lot of work. And we identified the linkages mentioned in the paper and graded them according to these 6 levels. Altogether, we went through, we narrowed down the group of 2,500 papers into 120. So there was a lot of papers which mentioned water as an example of a key resource or as an example of an SDG, mentioning or highlighting the importance of water as an example, but often the papers did not concentrate on water per se. So we narrowed the papers down to 120, which were like on a perfect fit to our work. We identified more than 500 linkages, how water security contributes to an SDG. And this means that on average, each examined paper had a link of water security to 4 different SDGs. The SDG with most linkages of water security was SDG number 3. So 59% of all the papers we analyzed had a link of how water security contributes to SDG 3. There was examples of access to clean water, reduction in water pollution, and examples of how, for example, people don't have to boil their water anymore, so it reduces their indoor air quality problems. The second one was SDG 2, zero hunger. This is quite evident that improved water security contributes to food security as well. And the third one was no poverty. So again, through the food security, but especially reducing water tariffs, and usually the efforts on water security and SDG has the greatest impact on the most poor communities. I want to show a few examples of the hits for example, SDG 2. There's a lot about the sustainable water resources to increase food production, improved water quality ensures soil fertility and contamination-free food production, hydropower for efficient irrigation and food production. These are the positive linkages we found, but there was also the negative ones. Hydropower again, so there's both positive and negative linkages it has. Hydropower protection against aquatic environments decreases the land area for fisheries and competition over water, just what Marko mentioned earlier. Another example with less identified linkages, but both positive and negative ones, was SDG 12. So there's municipal wastewater and treatment technologies for net energy production, but of course there's also downsides as well. So altogether, we went through each of the SDGs and identified the importance of water security in these. And here you can find or see how many papers were linked to each SDG. And there's the top 3 of well-being, hunger, and poverty. What is interesting in this figure is the lack of negative linkages. And majority of the linkages we found were positive, but there was very few negative ones reported. And this was interesting. We also did grouping of the SDGs based on how they react to improved water security. So the SDGs in the same group respond in a similar way. So for example, the first cluster of education. If water security contributes to SDG 4, which is quality education, it highly likely impacts SDG 5, gender equality, in the same way. And for example, in the climate cluster, there's the climate and strong institutions and partnership, which is also interesting. So this figure is an example of the leverage power of water security can have on SDGs. So having activities to support one SDG can actually contribute to other SDGs at the same time. So to conclude, we did find several examples how water security supports sustainable development. Over 90% of the examples were positive. However, the downside is that we didn't have that many negative linkages, so we might have a limited understanding of the importance of water resources on SDGs. We do state that there is leverage power. We had on average linked to 4 SDGs per one study. The key SDGs to benefit from water security were health, zero hunger, and no poverty. And even the approach or the method we used was actually quite useful to examine all the SDGs at once, and it could be used for another resource as well. And the Rubik's Cube is there to identify or to support the understanding that the SDGs should be seen as a matrix. So once you're trying to solve one, you actually have to take into account the others, and you can solve several of them at once. And last but not least, I want to invite you to check more about our research group recent work. So I come from the Water and Development Research Group. We are more than 30 academics, and we tackle issues related to water sustainability on food production, food security, power and politics, governance issues, climate change, of course, transboundary river systems, frugal innovations and businesses, and modeling. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maija. That was quite something to hear. Now we have roughly 10 minutes to discuss, and I'd like to start by asking that while you said that, in a way, of course, SDGs form matrix, would you go that far and say that by focusing on water issues would really be the key for, in a way, managing the whole package? Are you claiming that?
I am claiming that. I think that the SDGs need that kind of a concrete approach, or we call it a lens. So for example, we use the water lens. It's a large matrix. There are 17 goals and they each have a lot of targets and indicators. And it might be quite a heavy task to approach them, but we provide this water lens as one approach to actually see like their interlinkages and the potential of actually how to start using them in the society.
But would it be a more important lens than some other?
I don't know if I'm the right person to compare water to other resources, but yes, I would say that that's quite useful. Water is such a key resource. There's a lot of knowledge related to water in the lens or the context of sustainability, so yes.
Okay. Do we have questions from the audience? But from here we do have one. Please, Mikko.
Yeah, thanks, Maija. Nice presentation. And I'm a teacher at Aalto University, and I'm wondering, we had this exercise where teachers were asked to say to which SDGs their teaching relates. And I'm wondering whether water is a very isolated subject in Aalto, or whether you found a lot of teachers from different schools and departments listing water as their kind of area of teaching expertise or teaching coverage.
To be honest, I don't know the answer. I know that there's a lot of water-related research going on. About the teaching, I'm not that sure. I hope it would be a lens to all the courses. As a water professional, I can easily find a link to any course, how water is included in all the teaching. But yeah.
Any others? Please.
Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering, do you know if there are any other research group who have done this similar exercise with another SDG? And the other question would be, do you think you could somehow translate the results to help decision makers emphasize some solutions over others?
I know that there's at least one publication that used energy with the same approach. They did a different kind of a literature search, but they had the similar kind of an approach. And there was more negative linkages as well. Maybe energy is the kind of a concept that has more comparison between positive and negative linkages. Yeah. And there's a lot of potential for actually like concrete suggestions or support for policy making and decision making as well. These were concentrating on the very first phase after the SDGs were published. So it mainly concentrates the planning phase, not the implementation phase yet. So it would be nice to actually rerun the analysis in a few years now that SDGs are actually like put into action, and see how different the results would now look like, and would we get more of those negative linkages we were looking for.
Your group also operates or works in many different countries and different parts of the planet. And can you somehow reflect on the major differences between like different areas, how water should be addressed from this point of view, as you just described? A huge question, I know. But.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, I think the issues are always very context specific, so they change in space and they change in time. For example, Finland has just had quite long dry season or droughts, which like, of course, challenge our water management. The policies in different countries, of course, affect the equality and use of water resources and their decision making. So can't probably draw any continental conclusions or anything, but I highlight that it's always context specific and you need to know the area where you're working at and know the conditions. For example, our group works quite a lot in Southeast Asia and they have quite unique challenges in there.
There's one question from the audience here. Please.
Okay, thanks. This is my own question now, or actually there's one detail and then the bigger question. The detail was that the articles you were looking at, what was the time frame of the publication time when you mentioned now that it would be interesting to see into the future when in the implementation phase. So that was kind of regarding your data. But the other question would be, that you mentioned that there are not much negative links that you found, but when you look closer, the ones I saw in your graph, for example, the SDGs 14 and 15, which are the two with biodiversity, life on land and life below water. And if we again refer to the planetary boundaries that Marko mentioned, those are the planetary boundaries with biosphere integrity are the ones which are like the critical ones among the 9 planetary boundaries. So is it that among the negative links, even though few, but then they are connected to the most severe ones? And how do you see that affects the kind of challenge that is involved in water-related questions?
I'm sorry that I say this only now, but please could you introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
And
I'm Paula Schönach from Aalto University. Sorry.
The first question was about the time of the publication. So it was from the beginning that SDGs were established until the end of 2018. So we defined that as the first phase of getting to know SDGs and starting to planning their implementation. And the last question was about these negative linkages. I assume, or I agree, that probably only the most severe ones were reported, but we also challenged the results. We think that the negative linkages were underreported or not at least published or even studied. So we assume that there are more negative linkages to actually improve our overall understanding, but for some reason they were not in their literature.
Okay, I think we still have one question from the virtual audience.
Yes, please. There's one question for now, and I think there's another one then for the overall panel in the end. So the question is about, what about water resources as investment? What kind of problems we could have if you take water into the stock markets? Is it a human right to have clean water?
Oh, it is a human right. And there's already examples of the limited resource and kind of the monetary evaluation of it. So as mentioned, there's pressure whether the water should be used in food production or electricity production, who owns the water, whose right is it actually? And that goes to governance as well. So that's a tricky question and sensitive as well.
An important one as
yes.
well. Thanks again, Maija.
Thank you.
We'll continue together after the last speaker will be Mikko Jalas. And Mikko is Professor of Practice on Sustainable Consumption at the Department of Design. and also the head of Creative Sustainability Master's Program. And at this point, I have to reveal that just yesterday I got an email from a colleague including a meeting memo from the year 2007, where a small group of people started to plan the Creative Sustainability Program. And things take some time to develop, and now we have Mikko here. Please.
Thank you, Ossi. Nice to look back. Is it 13 years or 15 years of creative sustainability as a master's program? That has been a way and a place for me to explore sustainability related issues from a kind of diverse and overlapping perspectives. And I guess this day is one of those events and possibilities as well. So thanks a lot for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be here in the room and happy to be in the Zoom room as well. And let's hope that we have a good discussion also together, joining these perspectives that we have heard. Now, what I want to do here today is to talk about a substance or an element called phosphorus. And that is an element that is frequently brought together with water issues. That's mostly through the kind of pollution of coastal waters and inland water bodies as eutrophication in countries like Finland or water body areas like the Baltic Sea. But in addition to this, or maybe even more than that, I want to discuss phosphorus from a resource perspective. So that's different from it being a pollutant or an environmental problem. So firstly, a resource perspective and thinking about maybe like something like circular economy, where we actually, phosphorus really epitomizes the issues of circular economy, that it is possible to recycle, and it's critical to recycle in terms of our futures, but it's currently not being done, and we are actually losing the phosphorus stock very quickly at the moment. So resource perspective being one. Secondly, thinking about my own position, I will want to talk about a design approach to phosphorus. So how to intervene. It's not necessarily so that designers will be looking at the kind of global governance questions, but you may want to do it much more kind of locally. So I'm going to give examples about that. And my presentation title, Flush and Forget, when we get it there, will depend or relate to that as well. So toilets, human waste are of interest in this presentation. And finally, I want to conclude with a kind of small critique of my own presentation, thinking that we may be captured by this resource economics type of thinking in sustainability. And I'm going to say a few words about the dangers of that kind of perspective. But let's look at phosphorus as a resource and why it is such a critical resource. First of all, it's fundamental to agricultural production on the scale that we have now. So we need not only water, but we need phosphorus on the fields. This is the increase of phosphorus use globally starting from the 18th or early 19th century to about current. And you notice that in 1960s, well, a bit before that, we came up with a resource called guano. That's the phosphorus accumulated by seabirds on the coastal areas of Chile and other places in the world. That lasted for some time in the 19th century, but is quickly gone. And we started to use mineral phosphate as a source of phosphorus fertilizers. But at 1960s, green revolution into agriculture really boosts the food production, and we are benefiting from that in terms of, global population being more healthy, more nutritious, diets available, and so on and so forth. All of that is due partly to the availability of rock phosphorus. And what is the stake of that reserve? Oops. Like that, yeah. So some estimates of how much phosphorus do we have at the moment. I'm not going to the details, but I'm going to just point out that the estimations differ a lot. There are differs in kind of magnitude with these. So some say that we have phosphorus enough for 80 years. Some say that we have something like for 1,000 years. So between those figures, we may be. Typically for resource type of thinking is that the estimations keep on kind of, or reserves are found, and they keep kind of lasting and piling up. This we know from oil, from other resources. There is more than what we think, but there's definitely not endless amounts of phosphorus. Moreover, phosphorus is a very concentrated reserve. So China has global biggest reserves. US is completely or very large degree dependent on exports. And this has created tensions in, for example, Western Sahara area, which is a kind of the most concentrated one source of phosphorus rock. So not only whether we have it, but who has it would be the typical research question, or question of resources when we think about them that way. Well, starting to look at the kind of design aspects of this. Major losses. Where do we lose our phosphorus? It's not something like energy that we burn it in terms of to get some services out of it. Phosphorus could be, in principle, recycled, but we have major losses, and most of them are due to agriculture. So here we have the fields, the food production, leaking phosphorus, and eutrophication due to that being the most significant kind of loss. We have some aspects that are kind of that you don't even notice often. For example, the use of phosphorus in detergents and in chemical treatment. So that's also one area that is not insignificant when you look at these figures. Handling of human extracta, that used to be the kind of way that phosphorus was used in agriculture to just recycle the stuff. So you put on fields manure, you put on fields the human waste, and this is how phosphorus can be recycled. But at the moment, due to our waste management practices and some of the chemicals that are used in there, the mixing of industrial wastes and human wastes creates a situation where phosphorus is not returning from major cities and the water treatment plants of those cities into the fields and into the food production. So what could be done? Certainly we can think of how to use phosphorus in agriculture. It is being said that the Netherlands, the grounds in the Netherlands may have 40 times more phosphorus in them than what is needed. Then sub-Saharan agriculture is clearly lacking phosphorus. So we have things, questions of where to use phosphorus. We have, like I said, the management of waste flows. You don't get circular economy if you mix everything together. Source separation in a very broad term needs to be there. So we need to make sure that we don't contaminate our phosphorus stock. And that's the key to making use of human kind of flows. And of course, avoiding downcycling. So this relates not only to the keeping of the streams clean, but also to the question of for example, making phosphorus stay in a chemical compound that is usable by plants. Current water treatment systems, for example, in Finland, tend to make phosphorus or bind it in chemical compounds that are not usable for plants. And this is a kind of system failure in our current phosphorus management systems. Okay, let's go to design approaches, a few examples. What have we done and what has been difficult? Tuusula Housing Fair, taking place now. What we wanted to do in there 4 or 5 years ago, to have one row house with source separating toilets. This is because urine contains most of phosphorus of human waste. Urine is a sterile product, and there was an organic farmer who was willing to start to use that. And moreover, Tuusula is a municipality that has suffered from water pollution. The Lake Tuusula is one of the most polluted lakes, or has been one of the most polluted lakes in Finland. And we thought that, yes, here we have local support for our case, so on and so forth. However, what proves out is that existing infrastructures of water management stand away, or in way of these. Cultural preoccupations definitely stand in way of these. And now there's a slight typo. I have meant that market failure, or I have wanted to think that whether this is market failure or whether we are lacking the institutions for the management of critical resources. I don't think that anyone could be claiming that, well, phosphorus just needs to be a bit more expensive and then these kind of things would happen. I think when we are dealing with zoning and so on, with kind of the systems that cities run, they need to be making the decisions. So not to think about the kind of markets to fix this issue. Second failure. Now it's nice to be speaking of one's design work when it's just failures, but it's going to be 3 failures. And well, this is a nice project. We thought with the student union of Aalto University to make a new housing project in here with, again, separating toilets. But here colleagues from the water engineering department brought in the kind of technology of crystallizing phosphorus into struvite that would ease the management of that. And well, it just happened that we didn't get the funding. I think Aalto, the student union was very keen on having these kind of projects. And this is what we need in Helsinki. We need demonstration projects in order to overcome those cultural preoccupations. And also, like in this case, to really learn and kind of rethink existing planning and management practices of facilities. Final failed attempt. This is a nice one. This is probably my favorite one. Local restaurant Fat Lizard toilets. So again, separating toilets. Everything agreed. However, there was no black toilets. So the interior architecture, to my understanding, had at least designed something else than white toilets to the restaurant. So we couldn't find the right color separating toilets, and it didn't happen. So here you see that maybe even design could be something that is an obstacle for putting these forward. And maybe it is also so that when you are running demonstrations, you need to be careful that kind of what is the kind of the key in the demonstration. If you are going to very kind of designerly environments, your demonstrations will be in difficulties. Final word, and this is my self-critique. Yeah, thanks. 3 minutes time. This is going to be fine. Something about what we call well, resource economics. They say that resources will not run out but become more expensive. This is very, very logical, that once the price of something goes up, we have more and more exploration activities and excavation activities, and those resource availability kind of background or endings are something that we never reach. So it seems that when we think about techno-economic systems, whereby the price mechanism is there, engineering skills are there, it seems to be kind of quite robust in terms of generating and solving problems. So we can defend ourselves against scarcities or environmental threats of different kinds. But what I want to end the presentation with is this kind of a thought that the market logic may be a fallacy when you have environmental problems which include destabilizing positive feedback. So it may be that we don't get more phosphorus out of the earth if we just raise the price. It may be that if the Baltic Sea will not be recovering when we just say that let's increase the price of pollution, because there are accumulations in the environment and there are positive feedback loops that keep the eutrophication of the sea ongoing even if you stop the emissions. So resource economics gives us I think kind of a fallacy in terms of our abilities to control and manage the environment, and we need to think in terms of systems as well. So this is me. Thanks a lot again for your attention, and happy to discuss these thoughts with you.
Thanks, Mikko. We'll have some minutes together with Mikko, and then I invite other speakers here on the front as well. But let me start again by asking that you mentioned 3 failures. Why did you consider them failures, and not say stages at the longer process?
Thank you for your kindness and support. Yes, it is, you know, being a sustainability scholar, I'm very serious about these issues. I want to get them forward, and I keep on running up to obstacles, and it feels like, you know, I am failing when this happens. But I realize that we have multiple sides. It's not single time effort. Change takes place. And what I didn't say is that I have kind of scaled down. First, we thought to, you know, design a residential area. Then I scaled down to a single toilet. So this is also something that you have to kind of be sure that don't, you know, eat the cake with piece by piece and so on. But yeah, thanks. Yeah, I don't. Yeah. I guess from a kind of learning perspective, from a transitions perspective, failures are very important, and it may be that I want to use the word failure in order to make it okay to fail also in that sense. So that it's common to fail.
Yeah, very good, because I mean, it might be counterproductive sometimes in this context if you, in a way, focus too much on failures in that sense, because I don't know what would indicate that we have done enough or got enough success. But if we go forward, I think we can achieve something, and I guess we agree there, but just wanted to get your idea on that. Any questions from the audience here or from the virtual audience at this point? Please, Paula.
So this is Paula again. This is not really a question. This is maybe just a comment on the white toilet, or the lack of the right color toilet. I think it brings, be it a failure or not, but brings very nicely the point of kind of cultural perceptions of purity that are like a historically, when was the white porcelain not invented but introduced for sanitary purposes, and how that prevails so strongly today, and how these kind of very historical things might affect our abilities today to make changes. Quite an amazing story, I would say.
I also wondered, while we are talking about 2 very different types of substances here, phosphorus and water, and say it sounded like water is all over and it goes into wrong places sometimes without us having possibilities to prevent that. But phosphorus is something that we actively must take one place to another. So there's a very different types of substances we are talking about here. Any reflections on that?
I don't know, when I was listening to Marko and Maija, I was thinking that certainly there are crises about water as well, and they are often, I guess, kind of more local crises. Now we have a kind of emerging global crisis of phosphorus, and that's like why the US security organizations are interested in phosphorus, and this is like a critical global mineral supply, and so I guess the scale is a bit different, and maybe it means also that the actors are a bit different.
Minna, please.
Thank you, Mikko, very much for the very interesting presentation. What I was thinking was your point about the resource economics and how it almost always seems to happen that some resource is about to finish, but then there are the excavation efforts, and we just kind of find more. But now we seem to be in a phase where the loss of biodiversity and the laws, the problem with land use in terms of there no longer being enough, land or other resources to excavate without that leading to a system collapse. And I think that this is something that you alluded to when you said that there need to be systemic solutions. But after these very, I would say, successful failures, due to which you have clearly learned a lot, do you have any ideas of how to, come up with influential messages regarding this system collapse and how that could help us taking more seriously the points of upcycling or at least skillfully recycling resources like the phosphorus?
Good question. I think that resource economics leads us to think about global power. It leads us to notice that many of these resources are subject to warfare. And so this is when you start to think that this is the kind of global violence is part of our natural resources supply and allocation globally. So I think it's a very, very kind of strong message politically if we say that we actually have wars because of water and because of actually also phosphorus, oil, of course, and so on. So this is at least for me, and it just gives or tells the story that this is so fundamental for our kind of societies, and it's kind of far beyond only the questions of sustainability discourses. So many people are kind of involved in stabilizing global relations or the economy and so on. So this is a question that kind of is, I guess, difficult to contain. Then about mining and biodiversity, I agree with you. I think that the biodiversity loss is something that we are actually, that's like a new problem because that's not a resource problem. That's clearly not a resource problem. Now phosphorus could be, it's like almost kind of like a textbook example of a resource problem that it's needed for humans, and it's actually quite concentrated on globally. So the spatial issues will not hamper phosphorus production on at least in the immediate term. So, but I think that this is much more a question of just in general about resources and not only phosphorus. Yeah. So.
I know there are some questions from the virtual audience, but I'm looking at our time schedule, so at this point ask the other speakers here on front, and maybe we touch the question that comes from the audience as well. Please have a seat. Yes. So now we are all here. Paula, can you show us the comments or read them?
Yes,
please?
I can. We are looking at if the screen sharing is on at the moment, but there are a few questions which are very good for the general discussion. So first of all, this question was raised after Maija's presentation, but I think the others are well equipped to comment on that too. So I am curious about the negative relationship between sustainable growth or responsible consumption and water. In other words, the tensions between different SDGs. Why do you think they are not researched as much? Do you think this may be due to a specific researcher bias that as researchers we expect positive relationships?
Minna, please.
Just a very quick note to the person asking this. There is an interesting report by a large group of professors and other researchers in the UN process, the Global Sustainable Development Report. It's not as thorough research as Maija and her group have been doing, but they are actually looking at the interconnections between the different SDGs. And what they are finding is that there are more contradictions than, for instance, in your case of water. So Global Sustainable Development Report from last year, check that out if you are interested in these types of interconnections.
Maija, do you want to add something there?
Maybe just that as a group, we were surprised about this of scientific literature highlighting mainly the positive linkages, but it's good that there is discussion and there might be a room for methods to also identify those negative ones.
Do we have more questions from the virtual audience?
Yes, there is a very fundamental one. What makes us to change cultural behavior connected to our use of nature? Is it possible with industrial way of thinking? Is techno-economic systemic thinking enough for change?
Marko, would you like to start this one?
The last question, I would say, no, it's not enough, this techno-economic systemic thinking that we have. It is a fundamentally important question, of course, and I think it is ultimately about the values we hold dear. You know, what we see is valuable here, and that's something that goes far beyond the engineering skills of mine or economic skills of Minna's, and it's something kind of more dear and more fundamental, definitely. However, I would argue that at the same time it's important that we provide those kind of systemic views to understand, you know, how things are linked. I don't have the capacity to change our ways of seeing, you know, how we treat nature as a humankind, basically. But I have some limited capacity to make us better understanding what it means if we don't treat it kind of right, and what are the consequences of it. But yeah, I think larger question, and coming back to Mikko's earlier comments about these resources and resource economics and all that. So in a way, it's kind of clear that we are more or less hitting the limits, and that's what the planetary boundary is also trying to say. But what the kind of the social foundation or the social kind of limits of the donut economics and others trying to say is that the limit is not the same for everyone. It's not that the entire humankind hits that limit simultaneously. It's obviously that there are those in a weaker positions that will be suffering first. And the same goes with the water, as I said. It's not really there isn't that much fight at the elite level between the countries, but it is rather that within the countries, those who have already less will be suffering most when you know, water gets scarce, or whether it's polluted or not, for example.
If I continue a bit, if it's, well, as it is the question of changing our ways of thinking, our values and so on, you all have worked both in academia and outside of academia in consulting businesses or companies or somewhere else. How would Mikko, for example, compare the roles of the academic research work and then some business participants, for example, in this process of changing the attitudes and ways of behavior?
Good question. Maybe first one is to say that maybe the roles are also they are mixing more and more. So the whole notion of sustainability science thrives on a kind of transdisciplinary idea. So we think that researchers are much more engaged in practice, and maybe the other way as well. But I guess we all here are researchers who have been trying to also make the change in practice. So it means that's also one way to learn about this, but it's also one way, at least for me, to even justify why I am at the university. So saying that at the same time, I want to be involved in the practice as well. Now about the importance, money talks. Yes, I think that like kind of people who think long ahead may realize that, for example, renewable energy, or had realized that quite early on, that's like that has to be the future, that will be the future, that will be where, you know, profits are made and so on and so forth. So enlightened business leaders are important. Then I have seen so much of this kind of existing business practices that hamper and cause these failures that I was speaking about. So at the same time, I'm going to claim that businesses are very kind of slow to adapt, and not maybe because they wouldn't have kind of some, sparking ideas, but there's such a momentum in organizations that making change happen, changing standards, changing contract models and so on and so forth. That's all something that needs to be done. So in order for the kind of ideas to get into practice.
Mm-hmm. How about politicians? Minna, do you want to continue from that side? Because obviously, of course, businesses can do their share, academics can do theirs and ours, but there are other players, such as politicians.
Politicians and politics is very important, but actually I say something a bit daring here, particularly from the Finnish perspective. I think our politicians actually could move faster if there weren't the powerful business lobbies like trade associations that very often are speaking for the already existing biggest businesses and biggest industry, and not on behalf of the newer, innovative, smaller, or the startup world that is there with the new solutions. So my finger is actually nowadays less pointing to the politicians and saying that they should make the change. They should make the change, but I think that they are between a bark and a tree, because there is so much power in the business world towards the politicians. And this, I think, also applies in many other countries of the world. So I'm personally thinking that businesses should be taking more long-term responsibility, because they have the intellectual capabilities and there is also a lot of monetary resources in the businesses.
To anyone of you, how would the perspective of water be related to what Minna just said? Because I understood that you were of the opinion that water is something which we shouldn't do business with. Marko, or?
Well, I think taking example of water, I think again, kind of a positive example. We have a water stewardship, for example, here in Finland and actually in some other countries that bring together businesses who are willing, actually voluntarily, to see through their water use and make it more sustainable. Of course, there are also gains for them there. Of course, kind of corporate social responsibility aspects and other kind of consumer aspects there. But I do think that there are kind of positive forces in play that bring together players. The issue is that whether that's enough, whether it's a kind of club of like-minded that is small, that is too small, and how we are able to extend. And obviously, I guess, like with any sustainability challenge, it is really a combination of the kind of the politics or the governance of it from the public sector side together with the private sector businesses and then the research and the academia. And how I see that, reflecting back to the kind of the interface of that sustainability science really is an interesting arena, because it does bring together those practitioners with the kind of more theoretically oriented researchers. And I think it's our responsibility also to show way forward that there is a kind of change, first of all, needed, but it is also possible. Because it is clear that both the politicians, I would argue, and many of the businesses are quite, path dependent in their actions. I mean, daring to take step aside from the current path, which we are essentially requiring, is quite daring, and it does engage so much risk that there are very few who are willing to take that, whether you are a politician or a business. And that's something that we would need to help them to take that side step to another path that should be more sustainable.
We still have a couple of minutes, I think, and there are some questions or comments from somewhere.
Yeah, from the chat. These are actually rather small questions that go again back to the very presentations, perhaps, but maybe it's a good towards the end. So maybe I'll take the two together. So the first one is for Mikko about isn't one of the main issues with reusing human or animal waste the use of medicine or antibiotics and the fears about them ending up in our food supply? That would be one question. And the other one is what academic discussions are presently ongoing on growing cotton and on a scarcity of water? The cotton issue. So maybe just comment on these.
Briefly,
yes.
We don't have much time left. But
very briefly, the commentator is right. The issue of medicalization of the society impacts our abilities to run those circles, and this is also a gender issue. So that for example, the fat lizard toilets we now have the urinals for men, and that's less containing less medicalization than for women. And but it's an interesting point, and just makes you think that what does kind of good management of our critical flows really mean, and how kind of personal or bodily it may get.
And the last question was about cotton.
Cotton and water. Cotton is a water eater, and there is actually quite a lot of research going on at the moment around the materials that would be able to replace cotton, the cellulosic-based one, the recycled fiber-based ones, and then also in our research here at Aalto, we look very much at the new business models for longevity, meaning like how could we change the culture of consumption of textiles and clothing so that it would be much longer in use. And I think that this particular area of consumption is very interesting because there is really nothing that requires that we use textiles in such a pace, textile materials in such a pace that we do at the moment. So definitely a very interesting area.
Thank you, Minna, Marko, Mikko, Maija, all M's here on site. We could continue for hours, and we will in the next sessions. Thank you for the audience somewhere there around Finland and maybe elsewhere as well. And the next session of this type will be, Minna, when?
That will be on quality education, and the day is visible here. So it's October 22nd. So please do join us. A very interesting set of speakers, and I promise the discussions will be definitely very lively.
Thank you, everyone. Let's meet us and each other again on the 22nd.
And thank you, Ossi, for chairing.
Thank you.